Good afternoon. I'm Vicken Taunton, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Sherry Hobgood. She is a professor of emergency medicine at Indiana University School of Medicine and got her medical training and her first faculty appointment at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, where she began making her contributions to research and to education. Her scholarly focus was on the essential competencies of leadership and safe, effective, patient-centered communication. She's produced multiple interventions, educational content, interactive training programs that are widely incorporated into interprofessional curricula worldwide. Dr. Hobgood is the author of more than 100 peer-reviewed contributions to the medical literature. Her leadership at UNC included roles such as the Associate Dean for Curriculum, Educational Development, and many other accomplishments. She's also worked both with ACEP and SAEM. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Hobgood.
Thanks, Vicken. It's great to have everyone here. I know it's late in the evening. What we're going to talk about today is really the experience of the academic chairs in emergency medicine. And I started this research project, honestly, after a series of dinners where I continue to hear the same story, and you know, it really struck me that there was something going on in this space. And as I looked more and more at the data, particularly the AAMC data about women's leadership, not only in emergency medicine but across all tiers of leadership, once you hit that tier of the chair, everything seemed to essentially flatline. And for emergency medicine, it was even worse than many of the others. We've had about anywhere from a maximum of 15% to right now currently 11.3% of the academic departments in emergency medicine are chaired by women. And if you look at that space, if you looked at the faces sitting around the table at dinner, there was a lot of churn. And I really wondered why. And so I undertook this study a year ago when I went on sabbatical. And so this is the unveiling, if you will, of this data. So first to say thank you to my team for heaven knows thousands of hours of transcribing and coding, to Jane Bryce, who's the chair at UNC, who actually allowed me to use her research enterprise so that I could gain access to the UNC School of Public Health graduate students, which I think are some of the smartest in the world. And I really wanted to tap into their expertise for my team. To Jay Hess, who's Dean of the IU School of Medicine, for first allowing me to go on sabbatical and then continuing to support me throughout this project. And then to the participants, really, people really were very willing to talk, to share their time, their intellect, and honestly, what I call their great truths. And they taught me a lot about their reality and what is essentially our shared common reality. So I have no disclosures, with the exception that I've held a lot of leadership roles, and we're talking about leadership and we're talking to leaders. So that always introduces the possibility of bias, which I've tried to mitigate as much as possible, but it's, as you know, it's essentially impossible. The learning objectives are all published, but basically what I really wanted to do in this talk was allow you to hear the voice of the participants. I wanted to explore a few topics around emotional labor and some topics that'll help us get a better idea and potentially hopefully help us decode some of the culture of academic medicine. But at the end of the day, mainly I wanted you to be impacted enough by hearing these voices that you were willing to formulate a personal change strategy. For me, that's the most important thing. I think when you think about this, what we're going to talk about today, this is a story about today. It's a story about the present, but it's really based in the past. And that's important contextually because many of the things that you'll see are grounded in events that happened many, many years ago. The goal of this work is certainly not to chastise or condemn anyone, but it's my hope that if you can listen to these narratives, you can hear your voice or maybe the voices of your colleagues in a way that allows you to be more compassionate, to create a greater understanding of their world. And my hope is that ultimately we'll have a more equitable and just workplace for everyone. So this, the methods, this is basically a qualitative study, which is really to identify and describe the pathways to chair leadership, the challenges that were faced by academic emergency medicine chairs, and to potentially identify some solutions. The methodology is a qualitative descriptive study, and this is not grounded theory. The same work can be used, the same transcripts can be used to generate grounded theory, and that's kind of our next step. But right now we are in a descriptive phase. And so what we're going to hear today is really based on that. And there you go. And it allows us really to wrap our hands around the data at first, and then the findings are very straightforward, which are very then useful in informing policy and practice. So my little cursor doesn't work. The participants are all chairs of academic emergency medicine departments, and that's defined as a leader who holds or has held the chair title within the last 5 years. And participants needed to be members in AAMC schools. They needed to have at least 20 faculty, and they needed to have oversight of their budget and their mission. All of the team members who reviewed the data, including myself, completed positionality statements to acknowledge our bias and hopefully to minimize it by creating a state of mindfulness around our own predispositions. And we've carried that through, and again, remind ourselves frequently about our bias and try to minimize that as much as possible. We identified all the participants either via the AAMC listserv, the AACEM Chair Development Program, or the CPD. We used faculty lists at universities and hospital websites to validate, and then we took recommendations for other leaders. So we did use a snowball type approach to identify additional leaders who could be potentially meet criteria for the study. It's important to note that obviously there are many more men than women in this study. For the cohort of women, we included all women who met criteria. And for men, we generated a list and then used a random number generator to invite participants. Everyone was invited via email. And then we interviewed them via Zoom. And the interviews took anywhere from 1 to 2 hours in duration. There was a single interviewer, and that was me. And we used a semi-structured interview guide to guide the dialogue. The topics that we covered were surrounding leadership emergence, their journey, the barriers they identified, the types of support systems that they had in place or that they found to be useful, any types of judgments that they felt about the environment. And then we, of course, talked about microaggressions, micro inequities, sexual harassment, and the individual's risk assessment. So the results, I want to let you all know that this really is a first pass analysis. And the colorway, as dull as it is actually important because it's gray, and the data's gray. And I think a lot of people think about gender, as this very sharply delineated, male, female, black or white. But the reality of that is not that at all. So in terms of the results, our response and our sample construction, as I said, we included all women leaders that we could identify. We actually identified 21 possible women who could meet this criteria. And we ultimately ended up with 19 in our total cohort. We identified 70 possible male subjects and ultimately ended up with 18 in our cohort. When you look at the demographics, this is interesting and something that you should take note of because it does have some bearing on some of the experiences that folks had. The age range, very clear, women ranging from 42 to 66 and men ranging from 40 to 66 as well. Years in chair role for women anywhere from 2 to 18 years, and for men, one man had only been in his role for 3/4 of a year, and the most senior participant had been in their role for 19 years. 18 institutions were represented in terms of the women, and 18 institutions were represented for men. The institutions that the women where they seat are very different than the male institutions. U.S. News and World Report top 25, 74% of the women in this sample were at top 25 schools of medicine. That you translated to 14 women. For men, that was in this sample, there were only 3 male chairs who met that criteria. 6 of the women were inaugural chairs at their institution, and 4 of the men were inaugural chairs. When you look at the pre-chair leadership roles that the folks held, women were very well prepared. 57% had held undergraduate medical education roles, 73% graduate medical education roles, 63% had held titled research roles, 42% had significant experience in operation, 42% had prior titled roles in the dean's office, 42% had been a division chief and acting or interim chair. And when I say division chief, what I mean is a full division of emergency medicine in a department of surgery or medicine. So 42% of folks had held that role. And then 52% of women had held national level board service. And those boards included AAEM, ABEM, ACEP, ACGME, RRC, CORD, SAM, and NAEMSP. You can see the numbers for the male participants. The highest, the preponderance of pre-chair leadership roles for men fell into the GME category. So in general, the majority of the participants of both genders really were very happy during their tenure as department chairs. They enjoyed the role, and those who had moved on past that role looked back and said, you know, as a chair, I never worked a day in my life. It was the best part of my career. Uniformly, chairs felt a strong sense of accomplishment. They built strong and vital departments. They supported their faculty and their trainees, and they felt that they had advanced both the position and the power of emergency medicine within their institutions, and that is particularly important. When you look at leadership emergence, this was very interesting, and I tried to quantify this in a way that would allow us to just to kind of, again, get a handle on some of this data, because there is a tremendous amount of data here. Men were much more aspirational. They aspired to the role of chair. Women described themselves as more reluctant, and you know, you can see there's this kind of middle area as well for women. But when you listen to their voices, I think you'll see what this really kind of comes out. Men said things like, I absolutely wanted to go into a leadership role, but I also wanted to become the first chair, which only comes up once in every medical school. Another said, I was not only at the right place at the right time, but this was something that I sought out. Another said, I always thought this would be something I'd do. Another, I could see myself being chair and maybe even beyond that. This gentleman was a little ambivalent about why he did it. He was bored. I looked at chair jobs because I needed something else. I'm not sure why. I had a great job, 93 degrees of freedom, made plenty of money, lived in a fancy place. My wife and kids were happy, but I had to change everything. Another said, I was benign self-interest, I think. I became a chair because I didn't want to work for anybody else. I wanted to be chair. I never really wanted to be chair. I never aspired to it. But the same kind of sentiment from another participant said, I thought it was best for the department and for me personally, because I had concerns of what it would be like working for other people. The women's voices were different. Women said, if you'd asked me, do you want to be chair? I would have 100% never said I want to be a chair. Another described herself as an accidental chair, because if you told me I'd end up in this role, I never would have believed you. One was approached by their dean and said, I really want you to do it. And she was like, are you kidding me? Another said, I kept saying I would not do that job. I did not want it. I said it 10 times. I wrote it to them. I said I would help, but I did not want to be it. And they said, well, guess what? You are. So just get over it. Another woman, again, felt this same sense of restlessness. I started thinking, do I want to stay where I am? I was like, no, I want to do more. I want to do something else. So I started for chair roles. Another one said, I felt like I was hitting a ceiling. I wasn't able to affect change and I was getting frustrated. I was spinning my wheels and people encouraged me and they said, you should apply for a chair job. And I said, okay, let me do it. These two ladies felt that they'd always wanted to be chair. One said, I always had an inkling that I wanted to be chair. And another knew very strongly, I wanted to be a department chair. I knew that's what I wanted to do. When you look at leadership emergence, like what was their rationale for doing this? Why did they really want to do it? Women were much more likely to state that they wanted to build something and they wanted to fix something. Men also felt very strongly that they wanted to build something, but there was a legacy component to the male chairs that was really not present in the female chairs. One gentleman said, man, you know, if I could really succeed here, this place would have my stamp. It could be part of my legacy. Another said, I wanted to own something, to be unapologetic about making it great, to create a vision that smart people wanted to buy into and wanted to come work for you, to let them do their stuff and then hold them shockingly accountable. Another said, it was a brand new medical school. I looked at it as a chance to be creative. So it was really an opportunity to be transformational. Another said, the reason I came is because I had the opportunity to build something and be part of something. It wasn't just the residency we built, it was the whole academic platform. Women looked at things and really assessed potential. I looked and I saw this incredible potential. I thought to myself, if I don't do this, I'll always wonder what could have been. Another said, what do we need to do to fix this? See, we're just fixing things all the time, right? It's in our blood. Another one was a bit more altruistic. She said, when the position came open, it felt like a unique opportunity to turn the department around and lead it forward by maximizing the potential that existed within it. So that's how I got here. There was a need, there was an opportunity. So I stepped forward. When talking about risk, the risk of assuming a role like the chair, this was fascinating because that concept of what risk was very much, you know, a lot of what the guys stated, whereas women saw a lot of risk. But interestingly enough, they did not necessarily judge the risk correctly. Men thought, let me give this a shot. That's the way I've always done things. I'll give it a shot, see what happens. Another said, if you're successful in everything you try, then you're not taking enough risk. Another one said, I got here and it's interesting what risk does, right? I sort of bet my whole career on this thing. So I had two options, go back and beg for my old job, which I almost did, or just go for broke. I went for broke. Another one said, I made the assessment that the risk balance of becoming the chair for me personally was better and more favorable than not being the chair. I went into it thinking, I'll probably be good at that too. Another one said, if I did fail, well, that'd be hard. And I'd have to figure out how to get around that. But not doing it, sitting on the sidelines, I couldn't live with that. Women thought this is a huge risk to go to this place. It already has a reputation of not liking emergency medicine. So you're giving up a good job that you're happy with. So that's a big risk. Another one said, I don't think I did a perfect job of judging the risk, in particular, looking at alignment with what really drives me. Another said, I didn't realize the cost of the personal isolation. It was something I didn't understand or anticipate. It's really lonely being the boss. Another one said, I didn't want to leave my institution. So if I tried for chair and I failed, there was a risk that I might need to move. And that would have been really bad for my family. This one was great. She said, I took over this ship after it hit the iceberg. Now they're going to forget what got us here, but they're just going to remember that I'm the one who couldn't get us out. So in terms of role readiness, the men were about 50-50 in terms of their sense of being prepared for the role. Women, by and large, felt extremely unprepared, despite the fact that from our demographic data, we know that women had held a vast array of roles and had title roles in almost every domain. One man said, oh snap, why am I in this job? Another one said, I don't have any experience in operations. Another one said, my approach had not been validated, nor had I dealt with any personnel issues. I'd never really fired anyone. Well, quite frankly, I'd never really hired anyone either. Another one said, I'd never actually been asked to lead, and that I would be asked to lead in this space, that was motivating. Another one said, when the dean approached me, I thought, I don't have any experience with leadership, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Yep, this is great. Another one was very clear. I had an aptitude for this. Women said, it felt really overwhelming for a period of time. Another said, I needed a little more of that operations piece. Another one said, I knew theoretically and intellectually what to expect, but I really didn't understand this on an emotional level. Another one said, I think for the first 4 years, I felt really inadequate. I still feel inadequate, but I felt really inadequate in the beginning. Another one said, and I think, very much, much more contemplatively, I think these kinds of jobs have a really steep learning curve, and you have to acknowledge that you're going to enter that learning curve somewhere pretty far down the slope. After obtaining the role, the majority of participants of either gender experienced emergency medicine as a very low status discipline within their institution. And I found this to be fascinating. I kind of thought we were past that in our, academic development. The specialty is 50 years old now, but that was not the experience of the participants. Many said, at a place like the University of X, emergency department is sort of the bastard child. There was no buy-in for emergency medicine from hospital leadership, or emergency medicine was completely the dregs of the earth. This institution was in trouble with emergency medicine. They were very clear that the institutional status of the discipline was very limiting. And when they got there, what did they find? Well, the departmental condition was interesting. Men, it kind of was in three domains. It was either in disrepair, it was relatively well established, or was a straight up startup. And for women, I think about the same. So I think their departmental conditions were nearly approximate. Men said everything was new, right? We didn't exist. We were a startup. Another one said this was a well-established department. We had a 25-year history. Another one said, when I walked in the door on day one, the dean was firing several of my full-time faculty. Another one said, this was the worst emergency department I have ever seen in my life. In the first world, that is. I can imagine there are places like in Bangladesh that were this bad, but not in the United States. Like, it was horrible, horrible, embarrassing. The women said, the dean told me, just do it for a year. Otherwise, we're going to lose the residency program. Another one said, I did not realize what a state of disrepair the group was in, or all the challenges, the culture, the quality of care. There was just a lot of things going on. Another one just put it very bluntly, the place was a mess. Another one said, there were a lot of things going on that I don't think I got a good sense of before accepting the role. When I arrived, I was informed of what happening, but I found them in direct violation of my principles. This was the antithesis of my core values, and this was my department, and I was its new leader. This was a really, really horrible time for me. Participants in both genders were often surprised at what they found in terms of the department culture and condition, even if they had been faculty in the institution for many years. One said, even though I'd been faculty here for years, I discovered a load of administrative baggage and a very entitled faculty. Another one said, I was just cleaning up messes and trying to clean up a culture that needed to change but didn't want to. Another said, now a good proportion of my job is spending time fixing things that probably never should have happened. I'm on the cleanup crew for a lot of very talented people. Another said, I was never exposed to this type of culture. It certainly wasn't what I came from. All participants expressed personal growth, and this person summed it up, I think, really very nicely for the group. Said, you don't really know what it means to be a leader in a position like the chair until you actually sit in the chair. You have to make the decisions, and people start throwing mud at you. You dodge a couple of arrows and a couple hit you right in the heart, and you make some really, really tough decisions. That's when you learn who you are. You learn what kind of leader you're going to be. Are you going to fight the bear, or are you going to run headfirst away from the bear? Most chairs encountered significant challenge, and mostly in three major areas. First was in change management. The second was in holding people accountable, and the third was in HR. Interestingly enough, the data suggests that most chairs felt that they needed additional training. Prior to taking the role, they needed additional training in fiscal management, but it was uniformly the HR issues that caused the chairs the most difficulty. And across the board, the responses to the challenges at the level of the institution and at the level of the faculty really varied dramatically. And it's really difficult to, dissect that. Was this about being in a top 25 institution? Was this about being in a place that was much more clinically focused? It's very hard to parse that or to assign it any kind of gender-based reality. But it was very clear that there was some intersectionality. Rarely, a few women, rare, denied that gender played any role in anything that happened within her institution. She said, one of them said, much of what happened here is not related to me being a woman, but it's related to the history of this place and to emergency medicine as a discipline. We've had lots of challenges to overcome, but I don't think most of that was related to me being a woman. But most women felt that gender significantly impacted their daily work. So on top of being a woman, I was a woman in a specialty that was frankly dismissed and undervalued. And that was like a double whammy. And I think that's a really interesting thing to contemplate. If you think about the number of women that are at top 25 institutions and the fact that emergency medicine was seen as a low status discipline within the majority of institutions in the study, and then that women were seen as lower status leaders, I think that's very telling and an interesting little stack, if you will, of truths. So in addition to the 3 challenges that I listed, women leaders encountered a set of very unique challenges. I classify these as a solitary outsider status, the gender tax, the questioning of their authority, and personalized pushback. All of these things resulted for our women leaders in increased emotional labor and significantly higher self-reported fatigue. So, solitary outsider. In your role, you have to make a lot of difficult decisions that impact people, and you can't talk to a lot of people about those things. So for me, that was hard. I mean, I take those decisions really personally, and I think a lot about them. And because you can't talk about it, it makes you lonely. The other part of lonely is I can't be best buddies with the faculty. And for a period of time, I was the only chair that was a woman out of all the chairs. The chairs were all men that are buddies. I can have friendships, but you know, when they have, I'm just going to call it a club meeting, I'm never invited. And it really limited my ability to learn how things got done here. That's a really telling small narrative that really talks about the tiers that as academicians and as you move through your career, you know, you experience. You know, as a faculty member, you are very engaged often with your colleagues and have great camaraderie with the people that you're working shifts with or that you're working with on academic projects. But when you move up to chair, you are now isolated from that cohort of faculty in a way that you never were before. And your new cohort is the leader cohort. And when you are an outsider to that leader cohort, as many of the women were and are, it makes it very difficult. And it also stymies their ability to, you know, kind of get that insider knowledge, get that keys to the kingdom, if you will. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So more on solitary outsider status, because I think this is really important to think about, because what I want you to think about from this talk is how these folks are feeling. And so this one said, on the first day I walked in and it's an entire sea of white men with gray hair. Another one said, so you can imagine how I felt at that first meeting. I'm like, oh, I'm a quota, interesting. Another one said, I'm a token woman on many boards, and I was the only woman chair when I was at X institution. And so then I'm supposed to represent everybody that's female. That's impossible. We're a diverse group. We're as diverse as our male colleagues. So what I want may not be what every other woman wants, but if they listen to me, well, then we did what the women want. So what's the problem? The impact of the solitary outsider status is more than just being alone. This woman said, the guys would all go hang out together. They'd go golfing. They'd have social meetings. They'd have their families. But I was never a part. That hurts women's advancement in the big house. And here's why. That's where you learn the subtleties of what really matters to those people that are in leadership positions. You can't learn them at a board meeting. You're missing a whole aspect of what people really think, because they're going to say something different in a social situation than they're going to say in a formal meeting. So you miss out by not being included. All kinds of things happen in an informal environment that don't happen in a formal environment. I think that really nails it. And it really talks about what an extreme disadvantage women leaders are in, because they don't have the opportunity to get that code, that unwritten code that really is the secret truth about how the institution works. So there's a fair bit of data that talks about social capital and how it's more necessary for advancement than skillful performance of traditional leader tasks. So you can do your leadership work, your task, you can meet your dean's criteria, you can do all those things really well. But if you are not in the mix, if you are not someone who is seen as someone that they want to hang out with, then it's unlikely that you're going to move forward at the same rate that others will. So women are denied access to this informal network when they are in the minority and when the network's activities center on masculine activities. And unfortunately, in emergency medicine, that's pretty common. Golf, hunting, fishing. I wish I didn't have to write strip clubs, but I wrote it anyway because that's out there, and it certainly happens. Bourbon bars, etc. Those are male gender-based activities that women have a hard time participating in, and that's where a lot of information sharing goes on. This woman really said it well. She said they did their golf thing, they did their retreat thing, and at least while X was around, he liked me. He dragged me out to all those things. He liked to fish, and I happen to know how to fish. But if they'd chosen another activity that was traditionally male, I would have just lost out. But once he left, I became inconsequential. I didn't matter. I just kind of fell out of consequence, quite frankly. I mean, I come into the office sometimes and they're all gone. And of course, they didn't tell me about it because they didn't want me to go. I think I was just holding back the fun. That solitary outsider status has some intersectionality with the gender tax, but I want you to think about them slightly differently. Gender tax is much more, like this. I must have been out at dinners, no exaggeration, 2 to 3 times a week. Dinners out for this meeting, for that meeting, for recruitment. I was on 1 million recruitments. They plotted me out because I was the only woman, and of course, it was intoxicating, but it was absolutely ruthless. Another said, of course I get invited to the holiday parties. That's where all the donors are, because that's another way of highlighting the diversity they have. I'm one of 4. The last holiday party, the entire conversation was how diverse X university is and how many women they had in leadership positions. So I talk a little bit about descriptive versus prescriptive norms, because the next section that we're going to get into, I think you need to understand this just a little bit. Descriptive norms of this concept of communal. I'm sure you all know this. Women are said to be communal. They care about how others are treated. They're affectionate, they're helpful, they're friendly, they're kind, they're sympathetic, they're sensitive, and they're soft-spoken. Men are agenic, which conveys more assertion and control. They're aggressive, they're ambitious, they're more dominant and self-confident, they're forceful, they're self-reliant, they're individualistic. And these prescriptive versus descriptive norms that's a very important distinction to make, because prescriptive or injunctive norms are what people are expected or, quote, believed they should do. So men in their agenic qualities are prone to act as leaders, versus women, which are supposed to be prone to be a follower or supporter. So when we think about those 2 types of gender-based norms, then, again, Alice Eagley, who's just fantastic, her role congruity theory, and then this concept of prejudice and how women experience prejudice in the work environment because of discongruity with what is expected in terms of their social norms. So you have these prescriptive and descriptive norms of female behavior, these stereotypes, if you will, and they are incongruent with leadership behaviors. And so that incongruence really results in 2 major types of prejudice for women leaders. The first is there's a less favorable assessment of potential. based on descriptive norms. I don't think that she is achieving this. I don't think she can do it versus this less favorable evaluation of their actual performance, which is the injunctive norm. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the more agenic the leadership role is defined, in other words, the more masculine traits the leadership role carries with it in the environment and in that context, and the better that women fulfill those role requirements, the more likely she is going to be to elicit unfavorable responses. So it's a real problem for women, and we see it coming out in this next section, particularly in this area of questioning authority. So this woman wrote, so there's some underlying level of surprise. They act like they never heard this before. It's not that they never heard about it, but I don't think they were expecting me to hold them accountable. I don't think they were expecting some, quote, nice woman to hold them accountable. Another said, so when people ask me for things, I don't think I just say yes or no. I'll say I'll get back to you after I talk with the team and we've worked through this. But then they question the decision once it's made. They don't see me as being decisive. They see me as weak and malleable and mushy because I embrace a collaborative model and I stick to it. They don't get to come to the meeting where I say, no, damn it, we're going to do it this way, which sometimes happens. So they don't get to see me being decisive. What they see me being is the mouthpiece of some other people. So women pay some pretty big penalties for success in environments that are described as agenic. When women leaders are doing good work and fulfilling their leadership responsibilities, they are much more likely to elicit negative reactions. They're often described as devious, quarrelsome, selfish, bitter, irrational, bullying, deceitful, pushy, and abrasive. And then they experience personalized attacks. They get named things like, these are from the political arena, like Dragon Lady, obviously the B word we've all heard, or battle axe. And women don't get any credit at all if they happen to be warm and considerate, in other words, communal, because that's an expected behavior. However, if men are considered to be communal, then that is actually linked very positively to positive forward movement in their career trajectories. So this is a really important caveat, and it's really important for us to think about as we think about and experience how women experience leadership and how we experience women's leadership, which is that more negative reactions are more likely when women give negative evaluations, when they exert their authority, and anytime they threaten ego. So if I'm the person and I'm the chair and I'm, being forced to say, hey, don't think you, deserve this much protected time, or I would have anticipated or expected more academic output, I'm going to be much more likely to elicit a negative reaction. This woman said, I've had a lot of negative backlash from junior and mid-career women who were upset with me for holding them accountable. I tried to do it in a very empathic way. I gave them chances. I said, we're going to give you 6 months. We're going to give you a year. But these are the goals. And when I went back and the goals weren't done, they were upset when I changed something or I took away protected time. I don't think they expected it of me. And they thought I was just going to be a woman. I'm going to be a pushover. And I'm just going to continue the status quo. And when I said, I told you, do you remember? Do you remember me telling you that? It's like they never heard it before. But I don't think they were expecting me to hold them accountable. They think, she's so nice. She wouldn't do that to me. Don't they realize it's my job? I'm like, she really nailed it with that whole concept of, don't they realize that it's my job? The other thing that tends to happen to women in this space is the pushback toward them is made personal. Men do not seem to experience this, and I had no reports. I had one report of a male saying that the pushback was somewhat personal. But women said, I feel like we get categorized. We're mean when we say things that people don't like, but are the truth. We're bitches. And oh my God, she's so hard to work with. If she wants to take us in a direction that people don't want, then she's hard or a bitch. But if it's a guy, they just say, you're the leader. We're going to do whatever you say. It doesn't matter whether we approve or not. Another said, I feel like they want us to lead, but they want us to lead in a way where everybody approves. Whereas if you're the man, you say, whatever, it's just the way he is. Just do it. Don't worry about it. It's just him. That is a very different lived experience. That is a very different day-to-day life for men leaders versus women leaders. The concept of pushback being made personal, it carries through on many tiers and often is very hurtful. This woman said, the challenges I have with women are so much more than the challenges I have with men. I've got a faculty member, a woman, I've had multiple discussions with her, talking, giving her feedback about her role, etc. And she made a comment to me, well, but you don't understand. I pray for you every day. I pray for your children because they are not being taken care of. And I wondered, is she just upset because I'm changing something or taking away protected time? But I know she would never say that to a male chair. So stereotype threat is another type of threat that actually comes into play in this space a great deal. So stereotype threat is, obviously when you are a member of either a lower tiered, lower status group or a minority, and there is a particular stereotype about how your behavior should or shouldn't be, just like the two stereotypes that I just described in terms of being communal or agentic. Your performance actually suffers in those spaces if you are exposed to any kind of environmental conditions, verbal triggers, etc., that arouse the stereotype threat in you. So the classic example and the big study that was done when this was originally discovered was on SAT performance or women's math scores. Women were given, a prompt that women aren't good in math, and their math scores suffered. But yet, when they were given no such prompt, their math scores were equal. So that is the concept of stereotype threat, but it plays heavily in academic environments as well. And female leaders have increased stereotype threat when they attempt to lead in organizations that meet conditions where women are scarce, or in contexts where gender stereotypes are illustrated within the physical environment, or when the culture highly values competition or brilliance, which sounds a lot like academic medicine, right? This woman really, this is so classic stereotype threat. It's just should be in a textbook. First of all, the room that we all meet in, it's the chair's luncheon room. It's this incredibly beautiful room, which is just as you would expect it to be. Wood paneling, enormously high ceilings, large windows, and of course, pictures of men everywhere, and a huge long board table. So there's 29 chairs in the room, and now me. And you have to understand, these people are really famous. These are people who have won Nobel Prizes. These are people who are very high-powered people. So you're not just going into a room full of men. You're going into a room full of, oh my God, these people are brilliant. And you never think of yourself like that, right? So you ask yourself, what am I doing in this room with all these men? This is another type of stereotype threat that is very common and applied to women in both, frankly, by both genders. I was told by a female member of the personnel committee that you're just too young. And she said, I think, she really felt that way. I don't know if it was her opinion or if she was sharing the opinion of the committee. I'll never know. But people have used the fact that I'm a woman with young kids against me. And it's like, you've got young kids. You shouldn't be taking on this role at this time. It'll come around again. You've got a long runway. She said, I don't have that long a runway. People are making assumptions about how long you're planning to work. And I don't have that long of a runway anymore. It's not held against our male colleagues. They're ambitious. So I want to talk a little bit about emotional labor and how emotional labor plays into all this and the impact of emotional labor on women in particular. Emotional labor obviously can apply to men as well, and it really depends again on the operant conditions of the environment in which you are that is your context, and also on the expectations of the organization in which you're working. Arlie Russell Hochschild wrote this book, The Managed Heart. She also wrote the book, The Second Shift. And if you haven't read her work, you should. But she defined emotional labor and really defined the characteristics of emotional labor as these concepts of both deep and surface acting in response to organizational display rules. And the cohort that she looked at originally was in stewardesses. So they were told to smile and be nice to the passengers, and they were very much held to that standard. But doing gender is also emotional labor. So in other words, if I happen to be agenic, which I happen to be, and I'm expected to act communally, I have to act in a certain way in order to meet these gendered social expectations. That's work. That's work that no one can see. It requires a tremendous amount of emotional effort and emotional control for me to manage that. And if I don't manage that, obviously there are repercussions, but just doing that work in and of itself also it has some repercussions. So the big repercussion is that you get burned out or that you feel very inauthentic. Both of those are quite dangerous when you're attempting to lead a cohort. So when we ask our female leaders to act in certain ways, when we define leadership in a way that basically excludes any opportunity for women to be anything other than communal, we are asking them to perform emotional labor. And so this is a very superficial diagram of emotional labor. It's actually much more complicated than this. But when you look at this concept of surface acting and deep acting is when you much more internalize the concept. You align yourself with the organizational norms. That tends to lead to depersonalization. And there's some emotional exhaustion associated with that. But surface acting, where you have to actively mask your emotions and essentially pretend, really leads to much more emotional exhaustion, and a much higher rate of burnout occurs with people who have to surface act in order to manage their emotional labor. So the concept of both role incongruity and emotional labor really is, I think, a very strong interplay for women leaders. Because, if you are, again, being agenic, or even if you're being, communal, but you are holding people accountable, you're giving them negative feedback, the likelihood that you are going to get a negative reaction from that person is much, much higher. So this woman said, when you exert your authority, you say, nope, I'm the boss. Now you have decreased protected time because I asked you to do X, Y, or Z, and you held this title role, or you're no longer going to hold it. People don't expect that of you, and you end up having to push and push and push so hard to get to that place, and you're just kind of done. You're just emotionally exhausted by the time you get there. Another one said, well, you're a woman, so you're going to do this. And no, in fact, you're going to do this because you're a leader, not because you're a woman. It's tiring. It's enough just to have to do your job, period. But then to be constantly thinking about outthinking this or outthinking that. How am I supposed to look? How am I supposed to react? How am I supposed to treat them? Do I have to treat everybody this way? Or they're going to expect me to do X, Y, or Z? It's like a whole other job that men don't have. Men don't have that job. That is a really good description of emotional labor. So talk a little bit about management of sexual harassment, because I want to touch on this. This is really not, but it's important, because I think one of the key things for our male participants is that they struggle with this, and frankly, our women do as well. One said, I've had to say, listen, tone down the jokes a little bit. Jokes can be quite difficult to manage. Another said, there are a lot of complaints filed by the trainees. Then they wanted to step back because they were fearful. There was a fear factor involved, and we actually had to encourage them along the path. They needed support. They were afraid for their career. It was not an easy process. Another one said, after the investigation proved that there was in fact misconduct, I said, okay, non-renew. but that wasn't allowed. I felt helpless, but I tried to make sure that the two of them were never scheduled to work at the same time. But I felt helpless that I wasn't allowed to do what I thought was the right thing. That was an institutional barrier to a chair releasing a faculty member, predominantly because they were afraid of litigation. So micro inequities, micro assaults, really, some of them are really quite macro. They also cause leaders to have a tremendous amount of emotional labor. And this is a very good description of both a male and another woman who is not a participant experiencing emotion and frankly, shame that was very impactful. He said, we're in the School of Medicine leadership meeting. And the dean said, well, after I retire, after they get rid of me, they're probably going to have some woman in here as dean. And the associate dean for medical students, who was the only female in the room, and who, by the way, is a Parker Palmer ACGME award winner. And I looked at each other and our eyes met and our hearts just sank. We both kind of looked at the ground. And I think about that moment where I didn't say something, and I feel guilty about being complicit and not speaking up. I hung my head in disappointment and shame rather than saying, that sounds like a great idea. When can we start the search? That's because I wanted to make sure I still had a job. That sentiment, that conflict of knowing that your values are being transgressed, but needing to remain silent, came up again and again and again, in particular in the men. And so it is a very difficult cross to bear, I guess, if you will, but it is something that requires a bit more thought. Here's another management of a really what I think is much more of a macro assault. So my vice chair and I were going out to dinner during A7. We were going back to the hotel. We were in the cab line. This is a male. We ran into another emergency medicine chair just as we were getting into the cab together. And he knows us both. And he said, hey, are you guys in the same room? So I'll be honest with you. I was quiet because I was just shocked. I mean, I was so embarrassed for her. I didn't say a word. She just looked down and got in the cab. I apologized profusely to her. And then I called him on the phone. And I said, do you know what you just did? He's younger, so I used it as a I don't think you understand what you just did moment. You just insinuated that my vice chair, who's about to become a professor, who has done national work, and just because she's a woman, you insinuated that we're sleeping together. How or why would you ever think that? At first he denied. He said it was just a joke. And I said, it is not a joke. It was insulting and it was humiliating, and you owe her an apology. This is a great example of upstanding. And, I'm assuming that he did it in a way that allowed the person to receive the information because he, did use it as a teaching moment. And I think maybe that's something that we could all learn from to try and do this. He did this offline, obviously, but he did at least try to rectify the situation and was willing to step up. And I think that willingness is, again, often absent. We need fortification in that space. Your female colleagues need you in this space because this, unfortunately, is not an uncommon scenario. So what can we do? So obviously we can increase people's awareness of the psychological drivers of prejudice toward female leaders and work to dispel those perceptions. I hope that we've just had some broad swipe at some of those prejudices and how they're received by women. We can certainly work to ensure that there's a critical mass of women in executive positions, not just one or two women. It needs to be more than 30%. The business literature is very clear on that. And that begins the process of heading off some of the issues associated with tokenism and stereotype threat. So here's a great quote from a participant that talks about the impact of more women in the room. It's a really classic example of stereotype threat and how it was mitigated by bringing more women into the cohort. She says, when I became chair, I was the only woman. I was the only female chair out of 22 clinical departments. So every Wednesday we'd have this chair's lunch and 21 men and me. We'd sit in a room and we'd discuss things, and I almost never spoke. I was extremely uncomfortable expressing myself and speaking. And the few times I did, I mean, literally, people would look at me like, what is wrong with you? What did you just say? Was that Russian? I don't even know what you were saying. But over time, as more and more women have become chair, my voice has become louder and louder and louder. And I think that is great. One of the male participants said, "It is amazing to hear how the conversation changes in the room once you have diversity of opinion. And it's actually quite stunning, believe it or not." And I said, "I'm going to quote you on that." And he said, "You quote me then." I mean, it's important because especially when the voices are heard, okay? The voices are not always heard, which is problematic. But when the voices are heard, it's amazing how that changes the perspective and it changes the direction of the conversation and frankly, the decisions that are made. So this guy saw this light. He observed this with his own eyes. I do believe emergency physicians are some of the keenest observers in the world, and he's an ally. And he's an ally because he sees the difference that it made to have more women around, and it made the place a better place to work, not just for the women, but for him. So what else can we do? We need to prepare women for leadership with more demanding assignments. You know, in business, they call these, you know, line item responsibilities, right? You know, women need to have more leadership muscle. They need more opportunities to perform and to fail, frankly, and to be allowed to fail. And honestly, to be encouraged to take the risk to fail in some low risk scenarios and to compete with high value tasks. To complete high value tasks for the institution. Any kind of role that's got any kind of fiscal oversight or HR responsibilities are the most valuable types of roles because those are the places that are most difficult and those are the places they're going to get beat up the most. And so if you can let them experience that in a safe environment, they will actually have the opportunity to grow and hopefully in a non-threatening way. The other thing is we need to change some of the long hours. Additional flexibility is needed in all our workspaces. It is particularly important in the early career days of women. When women are not able to participate in leadership roles because there's limited flexibility, because the meetings are either early or late, because they do have childcare responsibilities, they do have responsibilities to their families, it causes them to drop off the path and they are not able to maintain parity with their male colleagues. So this participant said it can be as easy as moving the meeting to a different time. But if you really think about this, if you think about extending the tenure track, which I think a lot of institutions have done, well, I mean, I think that's a noble idea, but it fails if you really think about it. Yes, women achieve promotion because the tenure track is longer, and perhaps they don't drop out of the workforce because they have an additional 3 years. But what happens is if all the men get promoted in 5 to 7 years and the women all take 7 to 10 years, more likely 10 years, then they are already 3 to 5 years behind their male colleagues. So in terms of leadership advancement, they then lag, and then they're even more so behind at the full professor level. And maybe that's okay because women work longer, but frankly, I don't think it is. I think it is disenfranchising, and I think it's disheartening for women to see people who came in at their same tier of their cohort and their male colleagues advancing much more rapidly than they are. And if you read Arlie Hochschild's other book, The Second Shift, you'll begin to understand a lot of what's going on with that. Women typically come home and have another job. And yes, men are helping more at work, but work at home, but not necessarily they're not taking the full burden. And certainly we've seen a tremendous amount of data in COVID times that have demonstrated this as well. So I do want to do one shout out, which is this is from a participant in the AACEM Chair Development course. He said, I found this to be fascinating and I'd highly recommend that course to anybody that's considering becoming a chair. It was so informative and it was tremendously beneficial. That course has been running now. I think they just published their 5-year results. So that is definitely something that if you haven't participated in that course, it's definitely very worthwhile. So with that, I'm going to stop because that was a lot. And I'd be really happy to take some questions.
I'll go if I may, Cherry.
Go for it.
So that was really, really excellent. And I know that you couldn't follow the chat because you were talking, but the chat is just full of exclamations about how wonderful it was. So congratulations and thank you. But my question is about, I appreciate that you gave some solutions, but what about personal solutions in the sense that, like, if you want to be in one of these leadership positions, the deck is sort of stacked, and how do you balance self-preservation with the emotional exhaustion that you know is going to come with the increased emotional labor you're doing?
Well, I think to quote one of our participants, she said, just keep going, just keep going. Tell them not to stop. That's what she said. Tell them not to stop. And I think that's particularly important. But you know, I do think that you have to be thoughtful. You have to, you really do have to get mentors. You have to work collectively. You have to work smart. And I think you have to have a really clear set of goals and to be willing to take a look at that and plot out that trajectory in a way that allows you to accomplish those things that you find to be most important. It's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's tough. I do think sometimes you just have to bootstrap. But the main thing is just don't give up. Just because, you know, today is not good, that doesn't mean that, you know, tomorrow won't be better. But I do think you have to be in tune with your own emotional state and emotional exhaustion and the ask. And I think if we can inform more and more people about how some of these behaviors impact women and have them be more woke to the fact that when I walk into work, it's a different environment for me than it is for them, then that I think will be helpful as well. So I know that was a long, rambling, non-answer to your very pointed question, but don't stop. Don't stop. Give me some of those questions from the chat. I couldn't see it.
One of the questions from the chat you've already answered, which was, we've been educated. Now, what are the concrete steps that we need to take? Your first answer to that was, don't stop. But
Yep.
Sometimes you just can't take it and you do stop or you change tracks. How can we get others to better understand? Another question from the, well, we'll do that later.
Expand on that a little bit, Vicken, too, because one of the reasons that I read all those words, one of the reasons that I read all those adjectives that are used to describe women, when you start hearing women being described as aggressive, assertive, bullying, deceitful, it's very likely she's doing a good job. And it's really important for leaders, when they hear those words, to take a step back and say, hold on here, wait a minute. You know, we see it all the time, and you know, in our trainees and with nurses. So you know, a lot of the dialogue that I have around, you know, some of these things is like, you know, around how women suffer, you know, at the hands of other women, in particular nurses in the department. But one of the key steps as a chair and a leader is that you actually have to step back and say, and listen and very carefully analyze the words that folks are saying. And so when they say, well, this person's too slow, or they're not doing whatever, well, wouldn't you want them to spend time with the patient? Like, what is it? Tell me what about that is negative, and really pull that apart. Because if you can do that, then I think as a leader, then you are much more able to support either the trainee, the woman, etc. So I think it's really important that you listen carefully to those things and to hear the words that are said.
Another question from the chat was about that all of this is equally as applicable to persons of color and LGBTQ plus people in terms of the added emotional work that needs to be done when you are expected to act, speak, behave in one way, and also act, speak, and behave in another antithetical way, all at the same time.
Right. Totally agree. And, that was, I did not segregate. And honestly, there was so much in this space that I could not, tackle all of those other variables. So I chose to be more focused on, just this duality. But you are absolutely correct that this work is work that we are all going to have to do. This is work for our society. And I think that, being aware of that, if we, we're publishing a paper now, a rank equity index, and when you look at that calculated and broken apart by race, what you see is that at no tier, do women achieve rank at the same rate that their male colleagues do. If we could focus on gender only, if we could advance women across all of the races and ethnicities, then many of the issues that we have with rank and the disparities across race would be resolved. But it's work for the entire society. It is work for the entire academic medical center.
So we can't solve this, but we're hoping that society together will start to solve this little by little. Another comment from the chat group was, how do we counter the golf outing networking events other than learn to play golf? Perhaps that's the only way.
Who has time to play golf? I mean, honestly, really, do you have time to play golf? No. The answer,
invite all the men over for crocheting?
Well, no. Frankly, I think again, you have to make sure that your leaders understand that golf is a very gendered activity, and that it excludes a tremendous number, a cohort of their leaders. And you just have to be there, you have to be present. And one of the things that women suffer with, because again, they don't get the keys to the kingdom. In my chair role, it literally took me 5 years to actually kind of get the secret code. I was really at about, 5 years starting to have some internal credibility where my voice was actually being heard in the boardroom. And it took that long. And so, making sure that then that voice is used for good purpose. And, and I told them all, like, you got to get rid of this golf outing. I mean, this is horrible. They haven't gotten rid of it yet, but they at least listened to me, and they kind of said, well, why do you think that? And they were more willing to query. But if we destroy our women leaders, if we take them down at the death of 1,000 cuts, and force attrition by simply burning them out, then no one actually gets far enough along to actually be able to do the work that needs to be done. And so even if we don't like it, or like them, there's really good data that suggests that, women who are combating stereotype threat are just equally disliked by men as by women. Agenic women are disliked by men and women fairly equally. And so you have to know that and say, oh, wow, what's going on here, and be willing to dissect that and give that woman some credit and some support so that she can be a voice in that boardroom once she actually has some standing. Because it takes a long time to get there, a long time.
And it sounds also like we need to have allies in high places.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. And, you know, I think one of the things that we've seen is there are a certain number of medical schools around the country where women are being really aggressively recruited into the chair tier. And again, that is changing the conversation in the boardroom, and people's eyes are opening to that. But it does, again, it takes more time, and it takes work. And it takes mutual support.
And it takes risk on the part of the woman who's accepting it, because risk, if for nothing else, the risk of the emotional work she has to do.
That is correct. That is correct. And so I think that also cannot be understated. Even doing this work this last year has been very emotionally difficult. You know, some of the conversations that I've had with just have been they've been heartbreaking, honestly. And so it definitely requires that internal resilience, and the willingness to do it. So.
Are there any other questions or comments from the audience?
I read Bob.
You've said something, you've written some things, Bob.
Oh, I feel like I'm really the least expert person in the room right now in terms of comment. Just think this is so incredibly important. And in a way, it's an example of something that should not have to be part of the solution, but is part of the solution, where women in leadership positions are supporting naming the abuse and mentoring each other.
Right.
And, you know, speaking as someone whose wife has been in a leadership position in medicine, seeing a peer group of women leaders, of which she is a part, and how they support each other. I wish guys did that.
Yeah.
When it's done right, it's done well. But I also see you right now kind of as a token male in this group. We should have a whole lot more men listening and buying into this.
Well, hopefully they'll read some of what you know, what's going to come out. I'm going to need some reviewers, though, ladies. You know.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that this will be one more way that the women behind closed doors are delineating the problem and don't have all of the tools necessary to solve it, as I've seen for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do understand the concern, but I mean, again, we know what we'll get if we don't try, right? We know what we'll get. So we're going to keep trying. We're going to keep pushing, and we're going to keep speaking, and we're going to keep being there. And that is ultimately going to be more and more difficult to ignore. But again, stand on your Vitas, write, publish. You know, it's like you've got to do the work, because it's very easy to be dismissed if you're like, oh, well, you know, it's like, no, you know, put it out in a way that actually meets the gold standard for your institution, and understand what that standard is, excel at that standard, and move the needle. And you know, if the wind blows, be a flexible tree, you know, pop right back up. So that's what's got to happen.